The yellow school bus wasn't supposed to be there. In all the birthday party photos from that perfect June afternoon in 1993, it lurked at the edges like a predator, silent, waiting, wrong. 6-year-old Emily Westbrook blew out her candles, opened her presents, and walked toward the tree line to help a friend find a lost sweater. She never came back. 14 years later, when they finally found that bus rotting in the deep woods, they discovered the truth. Sometimes evil doesn't announce itself with screams and violence. Sometimes it arrives wearing a uniform, carrying a clipboard, speaking in the gentle voice of authority that children are taught to trust. And sometimes the most ordinary-looking people in the most ordinary-looking towns are capable of the most extraordinary cruelty. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The summer of 1993 was the kind that people in Willow Creek would remember forever, though not for the reasons anyone expected. It was one of those perfect June afternoons where the sun filtered through maple leaves, casting dancing shadows across neat suburban lawns. The kind of day that made parents feel safe, letting their children play outside until the streetlights came on. Emily Westbrook's 6th birthday party was in full swing in the backyard of the white colonial house on Elm Street. Pink and purple. Balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze, tied to every available fence post and porch railing. A dozen children ran around the yard, their laughter mixing with the sound of sprinklers from neighboring houses and the distant hum of lawnmowers. Laura Westbrook stood on the back porch, watching her daughter blow out the candles on a homemade chocolate cake shaped like a butterfly. Emily's blonde pigtails bounced as she made her wish, her gap-toothed smile lighting up her freckled face. Laura couldn't help but smile too, despite the tension that had been building all week. "Make a good wish, sweetheart," Laura called out, raising her camera to capture the moment. "I wished for a puppy and for everyone to be happy forever," Emily announced, causing the other children to giggle and clap. David Westbrook, Emily's father, helped distribute cake slices while keeping one eye on his watch. His brother Alan was late again, and David knew that meant trouble. Alan had been struggling with drinking for the past 2 years, ever since his divorce, and family gatherings had become increasingly uncomfortable. "Mum, look what I got!" Emily ran up to Laura, holding a small wooden music box. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate carvings of flowers around the edges. When Emily opened it, a delicate melody began to play, a lullaby that Laura didn't recognize. "Where did this come from, honey?" Laura asked, examining the box. There was no gift tag, no card. "It was on the present table with all the others," Emily said, winding the key again to hear the melody. "Isn't it pretty?" Laura looked around at the other parents, trying to catch someone's eye who might claim the gift. But everyone seemed focused on their own conversations. The Johnsons from next door were discussing their upcoming vacation, while the Millers were helping their twin boys clean frosting off their faces. "Did anyone bring this music box?" Laura asked the group, but received only shaking heads and puzzled looks. "Maybe someone forgot to put their name on it," suggested Beth Miller. "You know how hectic these parties can get." What Laura didn't notice at the time was the yellow school bus parked at the edge of the property, barely visible through the trees that lined the back of their yard. In the excitement of the party, with cars parked up and down the street and children running everywhere, one more vehicle didn't seem out of place. Later, when the police examined the party photos, the bus would appear in the background of several shots, but no one could remember seeing it arrive or who might have been driving it. The afternoon wore on with typical birthday party chaos. The children played pin the tail on the donkey, had a water balloon fight, and raced around the yard in a spirited game of tag. Emily was in her element, the center of attention in her new pink dress that Laura had bought special for the occasion. Around 4 o'clock, Alan finally arrived. Laura could smell the alcohol on him before he even made it to the backyard. David's jaw tightened as his brother stumbled slightly while navigating the porch steps. "Sorry I'm late, kiddo," Alan said, ruffling Emily's hair and handing her a hastily wrapped present. Uncle Alan had some things to take care of. David pulled his brother aside, their voices low but tense. Laura couldn't hear the exact words, but she recognized the posture. David's hands on his hips, Alan's defensive stance with his arms crossed. It was the same argument they'd been having for months about Alan's drinking and his inability to hold down a job. "This isn't the time or place," David hissed, glancing toward the children who were starting to notice the tension. "Everything's always about your schedule, isn't it, Dave?" Alan shot back. "God forbid anything disrupts your perfect little life." Laura stepped between them. "Please, not today. This is Emily's day." The brothers separated, but the damage was done. The easy atmosphere of the party had shifted, becoming strained and uncomfortable. Several parents began gathering their children, making polite excuses about early dinners and evening plans. By 5:30, most of the guests had left. Emily was playing with her new toys on a blanket in the yard while Laura and David cleaned up the remnants of the party. Alan had disappeared into the house, claiming he needed to use the bathroom, but Laura suspected he was helping himself to something from David's liquor cabinet. "Emily, sweetie, start gathering your presents. We need to bring them inside," Laura called out. Emily looked up from where she was examining her new music box. "Can I go show Jenny my music box? She left her sweater by the trees." Laura glanced toward the tree line at the back of their property. The Hendersons' daughter Jenny had indeed left her pink cardigan somewhere in the yard earlier. "Okay, but make it quick. It's almost dinner time," Laura said, already turning back to stack paper plates. That was the last time anyone saw Emily Westbrook. 20 minutes later, when Laura called for her daughter to come inside, there was no answer. The music box sat abandoned on the blanket, its lid open, the melody still playing in the gentle evening breeze. "Emily!" David shouted, his voice carrying across the yard. "Emily, come on, honey, time to come in." They searched the yard, calling her name with increasing urgency. Laura checked inside the house, looking in all of Emily's favorite hiding spots. Under the dining room table, behind the couch, in the basement playroom. David combed through the trees at the back of the property, pushing through low branches and scanning the ground for any sign of his daughter. "Maybe she went to one of the neighbors," Laura said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. They knocked on doors up and down Elm Street. The Johnsons hadn't seen her. The Millers said their boys had been inside watching cartoons. Mrs. Patterson, from across the street, was certain she would have noticed a little girl in a pink dress. By 7 o'clock, with the sun starting to set, David called the police. Officer Rick Santos was the first to arrive, followed shortly by Detective Frank Morrison, a 20-year veteran who had handled most of Willow Creek's rare, serious crimes. Morrison was a methodical man who believed in following procedures, even in a small town where everyone thought they knew everyone else. "When did you last see Emily?" Morrison asked, his notebook ready. "Around 5:30, Laura said, her voice shaking. "She went to look for her friend's sweater by the trees. I should have gone with her. I should have been watching." "Ma'am, you couldn't have known," Morrison said gently. "Tell me about the party. Who was here?" As Laura recited the guest list, Morrison wrote down each name. Most were neighbors, a few families from Emily's kindergarten class, some of David's co-workers, from the insurance office, all people they'd known for years. "What about your brother?" Morrison asked David. "I understand he was here." David's expression tightened. "Alan arrived late and had been drinking. We had words, but he would never hurt Emily. She's his niece." "Where is he now?" "I don't know. He left sometime during the afternoon. I was focused on finding Emily." Morrison organized search teams that worked through the night. Volunteers from the community joined police officers and firefighters, combing through the woods behind the Westbrook property with flashlights and calling Emily's name. They found Jenny Henderson's pink sweater caught on a low branch about 50 yards into the trees, but no other trace of Emily. The next morning brought news vans and reporters. Emily's disappearance had all the elements that captured media attention. A beautiful child, a loving family, a mystery with no clear answers. Laura and David found themselves thrust into a nightmare of camera lights and microphones, pleading for their daughter's safe return. Detective Morrison expanded the investigation, but the leads were frustratingly thin. A search of the area revealed tire tracks near the edge of the woods, but they were too degraded to provide useful information. The mysterious music box was sent for fingerprint analysis, but the results were inconclusive. Too many people had handled it during the party. Suspicion inevitably fell on Tommy Brennan, a family friend who had helped with party setup and had a minor arrest record for shoplifting from 5 years earlier. Tommy had left the party early, claiming he had to work an evening shift at the grocery store, where he bagged groceries, but his supervisor couldn't confirm exactly when he'd arrived. Morrison spent hours questioning Tommy, but the young man's story remained consistent. He'd helped set up chairs and tables, stayed for cake, and left around 4 o'clock to get to work. Security cameras at the grocery store showed him arriving at 4:45, which gave him barely enough time to get there from the Westbrook house, let alone commit a crime. "He's hiding something," Morrison told his partner, Detective Ray Coleman. "But I can't prove what." The investigation hit another strange turn when Laura discovered a note in Emily's bedroom 3 days after the disappearance. It was written in crayon on a piece of Emily's drawing paper, the letters shaky but clearly in a child's handwriting. "Going on surprise adventure. Don't worry, love, Emily." "She didn't write this," Laura insisted, studying the note. "Emily couldn't spell surprise or adventure. She's only 6, but handwriting analysis was inconclusive. The note could have been written by Emily, perhaps with help, or it could have been forged by someone trying to throw off the investigation. The most puzzling aspect of the case remained the school bus. When Morrison finally tracked down who might have brought it to the party, he hit a dead end. The Willow Creek School District's transportation office had no record of any bus being dispatched to Elm Street that day. Bus Duckers 42, which appeared in several of the party photos, was supposed to be in the depot for routine maintenance. "Someone took that bus without authorization," Morrison told the school district's transportation supervisor, a nervous man named Carl Hutchins, who had access. Hutchins provided a list of drivers and mechanics, but each person had alibis for that afternoon. The bus had been returned to the depot by Monday morning, with no indication of unauthorized use. As weeks turned into months, the case began to consume Morrison. He worked 16-hour days, following every lead, re-interviewing witnesses, searching for any detail that might have been missed. But Emily Westbrook seemed to have vanished into thin air. The last credible sighting came from Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, an elderly woman who lived on the outskirts of town. She claimed to have seen a yellow school bus driving slowly down County Road 7 around 6 p.m. on the day Emily disappeared, but she couldn't see who was driving or if there were any passengers. "It struck me as odd," she told Morrison. "School had been out for 2 weeks. Why would a bus be out there?" By winter, the case had grown cold. The FBI had been called in and had found nothing the local police had missed. The media attention faded as other stories captured the public's interest. Laura and David's marriage began to crack under the weight of their grief and the constant scrutiny. David threw himself into his work, staying late at the insurance office and taking on cases that required travel. Laura couldn't bear to go back to her job as a nurse and spent her days volunteering at missing children organizations, trying to help other families while secretly hoping for news about Emily. Alan, racked with guilt over the argument he'd had with David on Emily's last day, disappeared entirely. He left Willow Creek without telling anyone where he was going, adding another layer of mystery to an already incomprehensible tragedy. Detective Morrison retired 2 years later, the Emily Westbrook case still open on his desk. Before he left, he boxed up all the evidence and files, adding a note that read, "The answer is in that damn bus. Someone in this town knows more than they're saying." The box sat in the police station's evidence room for 12 years, gathering dust alongside dozens of other unsolved cases, waiting for someone to take another look. The summer heat of 2007 shimmered off the asphalt as Nate Harris pulled his pickup truck onto the overgrown dirt road that wound through what locals still called the Old Westbrook Woods. At 30, Nate had the lean build of someone who spent more time outdoors than behind a desk, but his sharp eyes and careful attention to detail had made him successful in real estate development. Harris Development had purchased 60 acres of forested land on the outskirts of Willow Creek, planning to build a modest subdivision of affordable homes. The property had been tied up in estate litigation for years, which explained why it had remained untouched while the town slowly expanded around it. Nate saw opportunity where others saw obstacles. "This is going to be perfect," he told his survey crew as they unloaded their equipment. "Close enough to town for convenience, but far enough out to give people some privacy." Miguel Santos, his lead surveyor, nodded as he shouldered his equipment pack. "Trees are mature, soil looks stable. Should be a nice development once we clear the building lots." They spent the morning marking property boundaries and identifying the best locations for houses and roads. The work was routine until they reached a dense thicket about a quarter-mile from the main road. What looked like an impenetrable wall of vines and overgrown shrubs turned out to be concealing something much larger. "Boss, you need to see this," called Tom Bradley, one of the newer crew members, from somewhere in the undergrowth. Nate pushed through the tangle of branches and stopped short. Partially buried under 15 years of forest growth sat the rusted hulk of a yellow school bus. Vines had grown through broken windows, and small trees sprouted from where seats had once been, but the distinctive shape was unmistakable. "How the hell did a school bus get way out here?" Miguel asked, pulling out his phone to take pictures. Nate walked slowly around the vehicle, noting how completely hidden it was from any road or trail. This wasn't where someone had abandoned a broken-down bus. This was where someone had deliberately hidden it. "There's no way this thing drove in here." "On its own," Nate said, examining the ground around the bus. "Look at these trees. Some of them are growing right up against the tires. This thing's been here for years." The bus's paint was faded and peeling, its yellow color barely visible under layers of rust and grime. The front license plate was missing, but Nate could make out part of the school district identification number on the side. Bus Maku 42. Something nagged at him about that number. Nate had grown up in Willow Creek, graduating from the high school in 1995. He remembered the Emily Westbrook case from when he was a teenager, the birthday party, the mysterious disappearance, the school bus that had appeared in photos, but it couldn't be explained. "Miguel, keep the crew working on the north section," Nate said. "I want to take a closer look at this." Nate climbed carefully through the bus's open rear door, using his phone's flashlight to navigate the debris-filled interior. Most of the seats had been removed, leaving just the metal framework. Small animals had clearly made homes in the vehicle over the years, and the floor was covered with leaves, branches, and unidentifiable organic matter. But in the driver's area, something caught his eye. Wedged between what remained of the driver's seat and the wall was a child's sneaker. Small, white with pink trim, the kind a 6-year-old girl might wear to a birthday party. Nate's breath caught in his throat. Very carefully, he photographed the shoe without touching it, then continued his search. Under a pile of decomposed leaves near the back of the bus, he found a crumpled party hat, its bright colors faded but still recognizable. And then, in a compartment behind the driver's seat that most people wouldn't even notice, he found the music box. It was the same style as the one in the police photos from 1993, wooden, with intricate flower carvings. The years hadn't been kind to it. The wood was warped and discolored, but when Nate carefully opened the lid, the tiny ballerina inside still turned slowly to a hauntingly familiar melody. He knew he was looking at evidence from the Emily Westbrook case. Nate immediately called the Willow Creek Police Department. Within an hour, the area was swarming with officers, crime scene technicians, and Detective Marissa Quinn, who had joined the force just a year before Emily's disappearance and had always regretted that the case remained unsolved. Quinn was now a 15-year veteran, tough and methodical, with prematurely grey hair that she kept pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She had requested the Westbrook file several times over the years, hoping fresh eyes might spot something the original investigation had missed. "Mr. Harris, I need you to walk me through exactly what you found and in what order," Quinn said, her notebook ready. Nate recounted his discovery step by step, pointing out the locations where he'd found each item. Quinn's crime scene photographer documented everything while the technicians began the delicate process of processing evidence that had been exposed to the elements for 14 years. "The shoe and the music box match items from the original case," Quinn told Nate, "but we'll need DNA confirmation and proper analysis before we can be certain." As the crime scene team worked, Quinn began making phone calls. Laura Westbrook, now Laura Mason after remarrying 3 years earlier, would need to be contacted. The original case files would need to be retrieved from storage, and they'd need to track down everyone who had been involved in the 1993 investigation. Laura lived in a small apartment across town where she worked as a grief counselor, helping families cope with loss. The years had been kind to her in some ways. She'd found love again with a quiet man named Peter Mason, and her work gave her purpose. But the pain of losing Emily never fully went away. When Detective Quinn called, Laura was in the middle of a session with a young mother whose teenager had died in a car accident. Quinn waited patiently while Laura rescheduled her afternoon appointments. "Detective, is this about Emily?" Laura asked when she returned the call. "Mrs. Mason, I need you to come down to the station. We've found some items that may be connected to your daughter's case." Laura's hands shook as she drove to the police station. For 14 years, she'd hoped for this call, but she'd also dreaded it. Hope meant the possibility of answers, but it also meant reliving the worst period of her life. Quinn showed her photographs of the items found in the bus, watching Laura's face carefully for any reaction. "That's Emily's shoe," Laura said immediately, pointing to the photo. "I bought those sneakers specifically for her birthday party, and the music box, that's definitely the one from the party, the one with no gift tag." "Are you certain?" "Detective, I've looked at the photos from that day 10,000 times. I could identify Emily's belongings in my sleep." Quinn opened another folder. "Mrs. Mason, we found something else in the bus. I want to prepare you before—" "You see this?" She showed Laura a photograph of a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, that had been found lodged behind one of the bus seats. Written on the front in faded blue ink was a name, A. Westbrook. "Alan," Laura whispered. "Emily's uncle, David's brother." "Do you know where Alan Westbrook is now?" Laura shook her head. "He disappeared after Emily went missing. David tried to find him for years, but it was like he vanished into thin air. The guilt was eating him alive. He blamed himself for arguing with David at the party." Quinn made notes. Finding Alan Westbrook would be a priority, but first they needed to process the physical evidence properly. The envelope couldn't be opened until it had been photographed and tested for fingerprints. Meanwhile, news of the discovery spread quickly through Willow Creek. The local newspaper, the Willow Creek Herald, ran the story on its front page. Emily Westbrook case reopened after evidence found in abandoned bus. By evening, news vans had returned to the quiet streets of Willow Creek for the first time in over a decade. Reporters knocked on doors, looking for anyone who remembered the original case or had opinions about the new developments. Nate found himself at the center of media attention he hadn't wanted. He gave a brief statement about finding the bus during routine survey work, but declined to speculate about what it might mean for the case. "I'm just glad we found something that might help Emily's family get answers," he told a reporter from the regional news station. What Nate didn't mention was that he'd become personally invested in the case. Something about finding those items, and evidence of a little girl's last moments, had affected him deeply. He'd spent the evening researching everything he could find about the original investigation, reading old newspaper articles and police reports that had been made public over the years. There were so many unanswered questions. How had the bus gotten so far into the woods? Why had it been hidden so carefully? And most importantly, what had happened to Emily after she disappeared from her birthday party? Quinn worked late into the night, reviewing the original case files and comparing them with the new evidence. The DNA testing would take several days, but she was already certain they were dealing with materials connected to Emily's disappearance. What troubled her most was how thoroughly the bus had been hidden. This wasn't the work of a panicked amateur. Someone had planned this carefully, had known exactly where to conceal the evidence so it wouldn't be found. The location was so remote that if Nate hadn't been surveying for development, the bus might have stayed hidden for decades more. Quinn made a list of everyone who would have had access to school buses in 1993, everyone who knew the woods well, enough to find such a perfect hiding spot, and everyone who had reason to want Emily Westbrook to disappear. The list was longer than she'd expected. 3 days after the discovery of the bus, Detective Quinn sat across from Martha Henderson in the woman's tidy living room, watching her nervously adjust the doilies on her coffee table. Martha had been one of the party guests in 1993, and her daughter Jenny was the friend whose sweater Emily had gone to retrieve. "Mrs. Henderson, I know you've been through this before, but I need you to think very carefully about that day," Quinn said. "Sometimes people remember details years later that didn't seem important at the time." Martha was in her 50s now, her brown hair streaked with grey, but her hands still moved with the restless energy of someone who was uncomfortable, being the center of attention. "I've thought about that day so many times," Martha said. "Jenny was devastated when Emily disappeared. She blamed herself for leaving her sweater by the trees. Tell me about the school bus. Do you remember seeing it?" Martha hesitated, glancing toward the window, as if someone might be listening. "I didn't think much of it at the time. There were cars parked everywhere for the party. But now that you mention it, I do remember seeing someone in what looked like a school bus driver's uniform." Quinn leaned forward. "You saw someone in a uniform? This wasn't in your original statement." "I wasn't sure then. It was just a glimpse, and I was busy watching the children. But I remember thinking it was odd because school had been out for weeks." "Can you describe this person?" "Medium height, maybe. They were standing near the edge of the yard, almost in the tree line. I only saw them for a moment before one of the children needed my attention." Quinn made careful notes. This was the first time anyone had mentioned seeing someone in a driver's uniform at the party. "Male or female?" "I couldn't tell. They were too far away, and the uniform was loose-fitting." After the interview, Quinn drove to the old school district transportation facility on the outskirts of town. The building had been abandoned for 5 years, since the district had consolidated its operations to a newer facility closer to the schools. But in 1993, this had been the hub of all bus operations in Willow Creek. Nate was waiting for her in the parking lot, holding a manila folder that looked like it had seen better days. "I thought you should see this," he said, handing her the folder. "I've been doing some research on bus No. 42. Inside were photocopies of maintenance records, route assignments, and driver schedules from 1993. Nate had spent the better part of 2 days at the district offices, charming secretaries and digging through archived files that most people had forgotten existed. "Look at this," Nate said, pointing to a maintenance log dated June 10th, 1993, 2 days before Emily's birthday party. Bus number 42 was scheduled for a transmission repair. According to this, it should have been out of service. Quinn studied the paperwork, but someone used it anyway. That's not the interesting part. Look who signed off on the maintenance work. Quinn read the signature at the bottom of the form. C. Hutchins, Transportation Supervisor. She remembered that name from the original case files. Carl Hutchins had been the man Detective Morrison had interviewed about the unauthorized use of the bus. According to the reports, Hutchins had been cooperative, but hadn't been able to explain how the bus had been taken without his knowledge. "Where's Hutchins now?" Quinn asked. "Retired in 2001. Lives in a trailer park about 20 miles north of here. They drove to Cedar Grove Mobile Home Park, a collection of aging trailers arranged along narrow gravel roads. Hutchins lived in a double-wide at the back of the park, his small yard filled with old car parts and rusted lawn equipment. Carl Hutchins answered the door wearing a stained undershirt and looking like he'd just woken up, though it was past 2 in the afternoon. He was a large man in his 70s, with thinning grey hair and suspicious eyes. "You're that detective from the Westbrook case," he said, before Quinn could introduce herself. "I already told the other guy everything I knew back in 93. Mr. Hutchins, we've found new evidence. I'd like to ask you a few more questions about bus No. 42. Hutchins' expression tightened. "Don't know why you're bothering me again. I told Morrison that bus was supposed to be in the shop. Someone took it without permission. Who had access to the keys? Hell, half the drivers had keys to half the buses back then. Security wasn't what it is now. Anyone could have taken any bus if they really wanted to." Quinn showed him copies of the maintenance records Nate had found. "According to these logs, you personally signed off on the bus being out of service, but there's no record of the actual repair work being completed." Hutchins studied the papers, his hands shaking slightly. "That was 14 years ago. I can't remember every damn repair order." "Mr. Hutchins," a little girl disappeared. "If you know something that could help solve this case." "I don't know nothing," Hutchins snapped. "I did my job, kept the buses running and minded my own business. What happened to that little girl was terrible, but it ain't got nothing to do with me." As they drove away, Quinn felt frustrated by the interview, but noticed something that bothered her. "Did you see how his hands were shaking when he looked at those maintenance records?" "Guy's probably been drinking," Nate said. "Did you smell his breath?" "Maybe, or maybe he was nervous about something." That evening, Quinn received an unexpected visitor at the police station. An elderly woman named Rose Callahan, who identified herself as a former teacher at Willow Creek Elementary, had seen the news coverage and wanted to talk about Emily Westbrook. Mrs. Callahan was in her 80s, with white hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She moved slowly, but spoke with the clear diction of someone who had spent decades commanding children's attention. "Detective, I should have come forward years ago, but I was afraid," she said, settling carefully into the chair across from Quinn's desk. "Afraid of what, Mrs. Callahan?" "Emily came to me several times in the weeks before she disappeared. She was troubled by someone she called her yellow jacket friend." Quinn felt her pulse quicken. "Yellow jacket friend?" "Emily said there was a man who watched her walk home from school sometimes. She described him as wearing a yellow jacket." I assumed she meant a maintenance worker or perhaps someone from the school district. Did you report this? Mrs. Callahan's hands twisted in her lap. I asked Emily to point him out if she saw him again, but she never did. And then school ended for the summer, and I forgot about it until after she disappeared. By then I wasn't sure if it was important. Mrs. Callahan, why didn't you tell the police in 1993? The elderly woman was quiet for a long moment. Because I was afraid I was wrong. Emily was an imaginative child, always making up stories about friends and adventures. I thought maybe she had invented this yellow jacket man. Quinn walked Mrs. Callahan to her car, then returned to her desk to add this new information to the growing case file. A man in a yellow jacket who watched Emily walk home from school, someone in a school bus driver's uniform at the birthday party. A bus that was supposedly in the shop, but was somehow used to transport Emily away from her home. The pieces weren't forming a complete picture yet, but Quinn could sense they were getting closer to the truth. The next morning brought another break. In the case, the crime lab called with preliminary results from the evidence found in the bus. DNA on the child's shoe was a definitive match for Emily Westbrook. More importantly, they had found 2 sets of adult fingerprints on the music box, and neither belonged to anyone in the original investigation files. We're running the prints through the database now, the lab technician told Quinn. But these are clean, clear prints. If whoever left them has ever been fingerprinted for any reason, we'll find them. Quinn was reviewing the forensic report when Nate appeared in her office doorway looking troubled. Detective, someone broke into my motel room last night. Quinn looked up sharply. What did they take? That's the weird part. Nothing. They tossed the place pretty thoroughly, went through all my papers and files, but as far as I can tell, nothing's missing. You think it's connected to the case? I've been staying at the same motel for 3 weeks while working on the development project. Nobody bothered me until I found that bus. Quinn made arrangements for increased patrols around Nate's motel and advised him to be careful about who he talked to regarding the case. Someone in Willow Creek was nervous about the renewed investigation, nervous enough to take risks. That afternoon, Quinn received a call from the state crime lab with results from the sealed envelope found in the bus. The envelope had been addressed to A. Westbrook and contained a single photograph and a brief note. The photograph showed Emily Westbrook standing next to the school bus, smiling and looking directly at the camera. But someone had carefully burned out the face of an adult figure standing beside her, leaving only a vague outline of a person in what appeared to be a uniform. The note, written in block letters to disguise the handwriting, was short and chilling. She trusted the wrong person. Quinn stared at the evidence, trying to piece together what it meant. Someone had taken this photograph on the day Emily disappeared. Someone had wanted Alan Westbrook to see it, and someone had burned out their own face to avoid identification. While still sending a message, the envelope had been sealed for 14 years, waiting in that hidden bus for someone to find it, which meant whoever had put it there had always planned for the bus to be discovered eventually. Quinn realized she was dealing with someone who had thought several steps ahead, someone who had carefully orchestrated not just Emily's disappearance, but the eventual revelation of selected evidence. The question was why someone would go to such elaborate lengths and what they hoped to accomplish by allowing the case to be reopened after so many years. As she studied the burned photograph, Quinn had the unsettling feeling that Emily Westbrook's abductor was still out there, still pulling strings, and still very much in control of how this story would unfold. The fingerprint results came back on a Thursday morning that would change everything. Detective Quinn stared at the computer screen in disbelief as the database match appeared. Carl Dunley, age 54, with a record of stalking and mental health issues dating back to the 1980s. Dunley had worked as a substitute bus driver for the Willow Creek School District in 1993, filling in when regular drivers called in sick. His employment had ended abruptly in August of that year, just 2 months after Emily's disappearance, officially due to performance issues. Quinn assembled a team and drove to Dunley's current address, a run-down apartment building on the wrong side of town. They found him in his cluttered living room, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and muttering to himself while watching morning television. Carl Dunley was a thin, nervous man with thinning brown hair and darting eyes that never seemed to focus on any one thing for long. When Quinn showed him her badge, he immediately began protesting his innocence before she'd even explained why they were there. "I didn't do nothing wrong," he said, backing against the wall. "I know why you're here, but I didn't hurt that little girl. Mr. Dunley, we found your fingerprints on evidence from the Emily Westbrook case. I need you to come with us for questioning." Dunley's arrest made headlines across the region. Finally, after 14 years, police had a suspect in custody. The media painted him as a disturbed loner with a history of inappropriate behavior around children, and public opinion quickly turned against him. But as Quinn dug deeper into Dunley's background, the evidence didn't add up. On the day of Emily's birthday party, Dunley had been at home with his elderly mother, who confirmed his alibi even under intense questioning. Security cameras at a nearby convenience store showed him making purchases at 3 p.m. and 7 p.m., times that would have made it nearly impossible for him to have been at the Westbrook house during the crucial window. "Something's not right about this," Quinn told her partner, Detective Ray Coleman, as they reviewed Dunley's interrogation tapes. "His prints are on the music box, but his story is consistent and his alibi checks out." "Maybe he handled the music box at some other time," Coleman suggested. "Before the party, or after." Quinn shook her head. "The lab says the prints were left on the metal mechanism inside the box. Someone would have had to open it and handle the working parts. Why would Dunley do that, unless he was the one who planted it at the party?" While Dunley sat in jail awaiting arraignment, Quinn continued her investigation into the other leads. She decided to re-examine David Westbrook, Emily's father, who had always seemed to be hiding something about the events leading up to his daughter's disappearance. Laura agreed to meet Quinn at a coffee shop downtown, away from the media attention that had once again descended on Willow Creek. Laura looked older than her 42 years, the stress of the renewed investigation taking its toll despite her hope for answers. "Detective, I need to tell you something about David," Laura said, stirring her coffee nervously. "I didn't think it was important before, but now I'm not sure." "What is it, Mrs. Mason?" "In the weeks before Emily disappeared, David was acting strangely. He was getting phone calls at odd hours, staying late at work, being secretive about his business dealings. When I asked him about it, he said he was working on something important, but couldn't talk about it yet." Quinn leaned forward. "Did this have anything to do with his brother Alan?" "I don't think so. David and Alan weren't speaking much then because of Alan's drinking, but David did mention something about problems at the school district. He sold insurance policies to several school employees, and he said some of them were worried about corruption in the administration." This was the first Quinn had heard about possible corruption in the school district. She made a note to follow up on David's insurance clients from 1993. "Mrs. Mason, where is David now?" Laura's expression grew pained. "He's in a psychiatric facility in Portland. After Carl Dunley was arrested, David tried to kill himself. He left a note saying he couldn't live with the guilt anymore." Quinn drove immediately to Portland General Hospital's psychiatric ward. David Westbrook was heavily sedated but conscious, lying in a hospital bed with bandages around his wrists. He looked much older than his 45 years, his hair completely grey and his face drawn with exhaustion. "Mr. Westbrook, I'm Detective Quinn. I'm investigating your daughter's disappearance. I need to ask you about the school district corruption you mentioned to your wife." David's eyes focused slowly on Quinn's face. "I should have spoken up years ago," he said in a hoarse whisper. "I was trying to protect people, but I ended up protecting the wrong ones." What kind of corruption? Insurance fraud. Several administrators were filing false claims, inflating repair costs, that sort of thing. But there was something else, something bigger. Carl Hutchins, the transportation supervisor, was involved with some very bad people. Quinn felt her pulse quicken. What kind of bad people? I don't know all the details. Hutchins came to me in May of 1993, wanted to buy a large life insurance policy, said he was expecting to come into some money soon. When I asked him about it, he got angry, said I should mind my own business if I knew what was good for my family. Did you report this threat? David shook his head weakly. I was scared. Hutchins had connections with people in the sheriff's department, the city council. I thought if I kept quiet and didn't ask questions, my family would be safe. Quinn left the hospital with more questions than answers. If David was telling the truth, then Carl Hutchins had been involved in something much larger than simple insurance fraud. And his threat about David's family took on a sinister new meaning in light of Emily's disappearance. Back in Willow Creek, Quinn decided to search the old-school district files more thoroughly. She spent hours in the basement of the administrative building, going through boxes of personnel records, financial documents, and maintenance logs from the early 1990s. What she found was disturbing. There were gaps in the bus maintenance records, particularly for vehicles that had been disposed of or sold for scrap. But there were no bills of sale, no documentation of where these buses had actually gone. More troubling were the financial records. The transportation department had been spending far more money than seemed reasonable for a small district, with large payments to companies that Quinn couldn't verify had actually existed. She was deep in the files when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Carl Hutchins appeared in the doorway, looking much different than he had during their interview at his trailer. He was clean-shaven, wearing pressed clothes, and his eyes were clear and alert. "Detective Quinn, I heard you were down here digging around in old files." Quinn's hand moved instinctively toward her service weapon. "Mr. Hutchins, I'm surprised to see you here. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realized I might have been less than helpful. The truth is, I do remember more about Bust Mesh 42 than I let on. I'm listening." Hutchins stepped closer, and Quinn noticed his hands were steady now, none of the shaking she'd seen before. That bus was being used for special purposes, not regular school runs. What kind of special purposes? Let's just say there were people in this town who had particular interests, and they were willing to pay well for certain services. Quinn felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you talking about child trafficking?" Hutchins smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm talking about people who thought they were untouchable because of their positions in the community. People who made mistakes and needed those mistakes to disappear." Before Quinn could respond, Hutchins pulled out a small recorder and pressed play. She heard her own voice, slightly distorted but recognizable, apparently making racist comments about one of her colleagues. "Technology is amazing these days," Hutchins said. "You can make anyone sound like they're saying anything. Be a shame if this recording found its way to your supervisor." Quinn realized she was in serious danger. "What do you want?" "I want you to stop digging into things that don't concern you. Carl Dunley is a perfectly good suspect. He's got a record, he's mentally unstable, and his fingerprints are on the evidence. Sometimes that's enough. You planted his fingerprints. I didn't plant anything, but I might have borrowed the music box for a while before it ended up at that birthday party. Carl did some maintenance work for me back then. Easy enough for him to handle it without knowing what it was for." Quinn's mind raced. Hutchins was admitting to being involved in Emily's disappearance, but in a way that couldn't be used against him in court. The recorded conversation could be dismissed as coercion, and he'd been careful not to confess to any specific crimes. "You killed Emily Westbrook." "I never killed anybody," Hutchins said, "but accidents happen when people don't follow instructions. Little girls can be very stubborn." Gwyn lunged for her radio, but Hutchins was faster than his age suggested. He knocked the radio from her hand and pushed her hard against the file cabinets. "Like I said, Detective, sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie." Hutchins left. Gwyn in the basement, shaken but unharmed. She immediately called for backup and put out a bolo alert for Hutchins. But by the time units arrived at his trailer, he was gone. That night, Gwyn received a package at her home with no return address. Inside was a second music box, identical to the one found in the bus, along with a note that read, "There were always two. Ask Laura about the one Emily never got to open." Gwyn called Laura immediately despite the late hour. "Mrs. Mason, I need you to think carefully about Emily's birthday party. Was there supposed to be a second music box?" Laura was quiet for a long moment. "How did you know about that? Please just tell me what you remember." There were two gifts that day without cards or tags. Emily opened one at the party, the music box. But there was another wrapped present that she was saving for later. We never found it after she disappeared. Gwyn felt pieces clicking into place. Someone brought two identical music boxes to the party. Emily got one, but the second was meant for someone else. "Or as backup," Laura said, "in case the first plan didn't work." The next morning, Gwyn assembled a task force including state investigators and FBI agents who specialized in cold cases involving children. The Carl Hutchins lead had opened up an entirely new avenue of investigation, one that suggested Emily's disappearance was part of a much larger criminal operation. Agent Sarah Mitchell, a veteran investigator with the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit, reviewed all the evidence and agreed that they were likely dealing with an organized group rather than a single perpetrator. "The level of planning here is sophisticated," Mitchell told Gwyn. "The use of the school bus as camouflage, the planted evidence to throw off the investigation, the long-term hiding of the vehicle. This isn't the work of an amateur." They decided to focus on finding the location where the bus had been hidden. Immediately after Emily's disappearance, the vehicle had been moved to its final location some time later, but there had to be an intermediate hiding spot where the real crime had taken place. Nate volunteered to help with the search, using his knowledge of the local terrain and his survey equipment to map out possible locations. Together with the FBI team, they identified several sites within a reasonable distance of Willow Creek, where a school bus could have been hidden temporarily. The third location they checked was an abandoned mine shaft about 15 miles outside of town. The entrance had been sealed years earlier, but someone had broken through the barriers. Inside, they found evidence that vehicles had been stored there. Tire tracks, oil stains, and most importantly, children's belongings scattered in a side tunnel. "Gwyn, you need to see this," Agent Mitchell called from deeper in the mine. She led Gwyn to a natural cave formation that had been modified with concrete walls and electrical wiring. It was clearly designed as a holding area with multiple small rooms that could be locked from the outside. In one of the rooms, they found drawings on the walls, childish crayon pictures of yellow buses, houses, and stick figures that looked like families. In the corner, almost hidden under years of debris, was a small piece of pink fabric that matched the dress Emily had been wearing at her birthday party. But the most chilling discovery was a metal box buried under loose rocks near the back of the cave. Inside were identification documents for at least 6 different children, spanning a period from 1987 to 1995. Emily Westbrook was the last name on the list. This wasn't just about Emily, Gwyn realized. This was an ongoing operation that had been running for years. Agent Mitchell nodded grimly. And if we're right about the timeline, it might have continued after 1995. They spent the rest of the day processing the crime scene and cataloging evidence. The FBI began cross-referencing the names in the metal box with missing persons cases from across the region. What they found was a pattern of disappearances that had been dismissed as runaways or family abductions, but which now appeared to be connected. As the investigation expanded, Quinn received a call from an unexpected source. Emily Westbrook, Emily's uncle who had disappeared after her death, was calling from a payphone in Montana. "Detective, I saw the news about Carl Hutchins. I need to tell you what really happened that day." Quinn put the call on speaker, so Agent Mitchell could hear. "Mr. Westbrook, where have you been for 14 years? Hiding, running. I knew if I stayed in Willow Creek I'd end up dead like the others who tried to speak up." "What others?" "There was a teacher, Margaret Thompson, who started asking questions about children who'd gone missing. She died in a car accident 6 months after Emily disappeared, and a maintenance worker named Joe Peters who said he'd seen buses being used for unauthorized trips. He had a heart attack at age 35. Quinn exchanged glances with Agent Mitchell. "Alan, what did you see at the birthday party?" "I saw Carl Hutchins talking to someone on a cell phone near the tree line. This was back when cell phones were expensive, not everyone had them. He was reporting to someone, telling them the target was in position." "Why didn't you tell the police this in 1993? Alan's voice broke. "Because I was drunk and I thought nobody would believe me. And because Hutchins approached me later and said if I talked, my whole family would disappear. I believed him. Alan, we need you to come back and testify." "I can't. They'll kill me before I ever make it to court, but I can tell you where to find proof of what they were doing." Alan gave them the location of a storage unit he'd been renting under a false name since 1993. Inside, Quinn and the FBI team found boxes of documents that Alan had stolen from the school district before he fled town. The papers revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. A group of influential men in Willow Creek, including school board members, city officials, and law enforcement officers, had been running a child trafficking operation using school buses as transportation. They targeted children from troubled families or single parents, kids who might not be immediately missed. Emily Westbrook had been a mistake. She came from a stable, loving family that would never stop looking for her. Her disappearance had brought too much attention to their operation, forcing them to shut it down and eliminate evidence. They killed her because she wasn't supposed to be a target, Quinn realized. Someone screwed up and took the wrong child. The documents also revealed why Carl Dunley's fingerprints were on the music box. He had been hired to plant listening devices in the homes of potential victims, disguised as gifts or repairs. The music boxes contained tiny microphones that allowed the conspirators to monitor families and identify the best times to strike. With this evidence, the FBI was able to obtain arrest warrants for 7 men who were still alive and living in the area. The raids happened simultaneously at dawn, catching most of the suspects before they could flee or destroy evidence. Carl Hutchins was found at a cabin in the mountains, along with detailed records of the trafficking operation and photographs of dozens of children. When confronted with the evidence, he agreed to cooperate in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. "We never meant for the Westbrook girl to be taken," he told investigators. "She was supposed to be a reconnaissance target only, but a guy panicked when she saw his face and things got out of hand." "What happened to Emily?" Hutchins looked away. "She fought back, tried to run. There was an accident." "Where is she?" "Root cellar behind the old Henderson farm, about 2 miles past. Where you found the mine. She's been there all along." The recovery of Emily Westbrook's remains brought both closure and heartbreak to her family and the community of Willow Creek. The little girl who had vanished from her 6th birthday party was finally coming home, 14 years after she'd been taken from the only world she'd ever known. Laura stood at the graveside on a crisp October morning, holding the hand of her husband Peter, while dozens of community members gathered to pay their respects. Emily's funeral became a symbol of resilience and the power of never giving up hope, even in the darkest circumstances. Emily would have been 20 years old now, Laura said during her eulogy. She would have been starting college, falling, in love, dreaming about her future. Instead, she's forever 6 years old in our hearts, forever the little girl who believed in the goodness of people and trusted too easily. The trial of the trafficking ring members dominated regional news for months. Carl Hutchins received life in prison without possibility of parole in exchange for his cooperation. 3 other men received similar sentences, while the remaining conspirators were given terms ranging from 25 to 40 years. The investigation revealed that at least 12 children had been victims of the trafficking operation over an 8-year period. Some had been sold to buyers in other states. Others had been killed when they became too difficult to control. Emily's case had been the beginning of the end for the operation, but it had taken 14 years for justice to finally catch up. Detective Quinn found herself promoted to lieutenant and put in charge of a new cold case unit dedicated to investigating unsolved crimes against children. The Emily Westbrook case had shown how much evidence could be recovered years later with improved technology and fresh perspectives. "Every case deserves this level of attention," Quinn told a reporter from the state newspaper. "These families never stop grieving, never stop hoping for answers. We owe it to them to never give up." Nate Harris completed his development project on the land where he'd discovered the hidden school bus, but he made sure to include a small memorial park dedicated to Emily and the other victims. The park featured a playground and a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of the children who trusted the wrong people, and in honor of those who never stopped searching for the truth." David Westbrook recovered from his suicide attempt and was released from the psychiatric facility 6 months after the trial ended. He and Laura began meeting regularly for coffee, slowly rebuilding a friendship that had been shattered by tragedy and years of unspoken suspicions. "I should have trusted you with what I knew," David told Laura during one of their meetings. "I thought I was protecting you and Emily by keeping quiet about the corruption, but my silence made everything worse." Laura had started a foundation called Emily's Voice, which provided support to families of missing children and funded improved investigation techniques for cold cases. The Foundation's first major project was establishing a national database of unsolved child disappearances, making it easier for law enforcement agencies to identify patterns and connections. Emily's death wasn't meaningless if it prevents other families from going through what we went through, Laura explained to Foundation donors. "Every child deserves to come home." Alan Westbrook eventually returned to Willow Creek to testify in the final trial of the conspiracy members. He had been sober for 12 years and worked as a counselor, helping other people overcome addiction and trauma. "Running away didn't solve anything," he told David during their first meeting in over a decade. "I should have stayed and fought for Emily from the beginning." The brothers reconciled, though their relationship would never fully recover from the years of separation and guilt. Alan moved back to town and opened a small carpentry shop, donating much of his profits to Emily's Voice Foundation. The revelation of the trafficking conspiracy sent shockwaves through Willow Creek's government and school system. A complete restructuring of the school district was mandated by the state, with new oversight procedures and background check requirements. Several city council members resigned in shame, even though they hadn't been directly involved in the crimes. "This can never happen again," declared the new school superintendent during a community meeting. "We're implementing safeguards and transparency measures that will make it impossible for anyone to use our schools to harm children." Nate continued his real estate development work, but became increasingly involved in cold case investigations. He developed a technique for using ground-penetrating radar and historical land records to locate potential burial sites and hidden evidence. "There are answers out there waiting to be found," he said during a conference on missing persons investigations. "Sometimes all it takes is someone looking in the right place at the right time." The case attracted national attention and inspired other law enforcement agencies to reopen cold cases involving missing children. The FBI created a new task force specifically focused on historical child trafficking cases, using lessons learned from the Willow Creek investigation. Agent Sarah Mitchell led the task force and estimated that similar conspiracies might have operated in dozens of small communities across the country during the 1980s and 1990s, when communication between law enforcement agencies was limited and record-keeping was less sophisticated. On the first anniversary of Emily's funeral, the community held a memorial walk from the site where she disappeared to the cemetery where she was buried. Hundreds of people participated, including families of other missing children who had found hope in Emily's story. Laura walked at the front of the procession, carrying a photograph of Emily taken at her 6th birthday party. In the picture, Emily was smiling broadly, her eyes bright with the joy and innocence that had been stolen from her too soon. Emily loved parades and celebrations, Laura told the crowd gathered at the cemetery. She would have loved seeing so. Many people come together to remember her and to promise that we'll never stop fighting for children who can't fight for themselves. As the memorial service concluded, Quinn read aloud from a journal that had been found among Emily's belongings in the hidden cave. The final entry, written in a 6-year-old's careful handwriting, brought tears to many eyes. "If someone finds this, tell my mom I tried to come home. Tell her I wasn't scared because I knew she would look for me. Tell her I love her, and I'm sorry I followed the yellow jacket man. I thought he was going to help me find Jenny's sweater." The Emily Westbrook case officially closed with the conviction of the last conspiracy member, but its impact continued to ripple outward. Laws were changed to improve coordination between agencies investigating missing children. Training programs were established to help officers recognize signs of organized trafficking operations. And most importantly, families across the country gained hope that their missing children might someday be found. In the final scene of this long and tragic story, Quinn received a phone call from a detective in a neighboring state. A parent had brought in a photograph of their child who had disappeared in 1987, 15 years before Emily's case. "Detective Quinn, I think we might have found evidence of your trafficking ring operating in our jurisdiction," the detective said. "How soon can you get here?" Quinn looked at the photo of Emily Westbrook that sat on her desk, smiled sadly, and reached for her car keys. Emily's voice would continue to speak for children who couldn't speak for themselves, and the fight for justice would go on. "How many yellow buses have you seen today? And did you ever wonder who was really behind the wheel?" If this story reminded you to question the faces we're taught to trust, hit that like button and subscribe for more true crime. Mysteries that will make you see your neighborhood and your neighbors in a whole new light.